The month of October started with a little bonus campaign related to the future Trunks arc, so just like last time, it meant something related to Trunks or his arc was coming soon. At the same time, they also re-released the Dragon Ball Fusions banner, which is kind of crazy. It's not even been 2 months since the banner first released, and the craziest part is that some of these units even got Dokkan Awakenings. Bullpen didn't get much, like she just got a 7th link, being Shattering the Limit, so I guess she was an even better key battery now, and her support HP threshold got reduced from 50 to 30% HP. So I guess she got the buffs you would have expected from a unit that released like 2 months ago, and that also was very easy to awaken. People liked her a lot at the time simply for that fact. You only needed 7 GT Pan medals to awaken her into a TUR. So she was an easy to awaken TUR, something that was not very common at the time. Coralie also didn't get much, but he got enough for him to actually become pretty decent. They increased the attack buff on his passive and completely removed the HP restriction he previously had. Couple that with the fact that he got an additional key link and TUR stats, yeah, this guy was now dishing out some decent numbers fairly easily, while still having the ability to stun on super. He was the hardest one to awaken though. You needed 35 medals from the Broly Dokkan event, which was still a very hard event at the time. And now that I think about it, why did he get Shattering the Limit instead of Fierce Battle? Shattering the Limit was definitely like a better link for him at the time, but now I don't know. Fierce Battle would have probably helped this guy more in the long run. Completely unrelated fact, but did you know that the Dragon Ball Fusions game got a DLC around the same time featuring a fusion of Goku Black and Broly? It honestly looks pretty cool, and if they ever release a new Dragon Ball Fusions game, I could definitely see them introducing it into Dokkan. Coming back to the Fusions units, Pandel, like the other 2 units, also didn't get much. They just gave her Shattering the Limit and an additional 5% attack to her support type buff. But that additional key link was actually quite a significant buff when you take into account the fact that she already had 4 key links and that she was a support type unit. So she was now just like Bullpen, a very versatile key battery that you could slap on any team she could be ran on. And she also only needed 7 Pan medals to become a TUR. So just like Bullpen, she was a very easy to awaken TUR. The banner was just as great as the first one. It had the 3 guaranteed featured discounted multis and was probably worth it just for Bullpen and Pandel. Well, in reality, not a single banner was actually worth summoning for if you knew what was coming in the following months. But people didn't know that at the time, so I guess if you wanted Bullpen or Pandel, it was worth it. The banner also came with a new story event, where you could farm 2 new Dragon Ball Fusions characters, Pinish and Tika, or however you spell those names, were not all that, but I guess they could help you out if you were a new player. The next week they re-released the physical type summon banner. I honestly don't even know if those banners are worth mentioning anymore. Like, it still had some decent options like physical Super Saiyan Gotenks, the New Kid Blue Boys, or Xenotrunks, but it really just wasn't all that, and definitely not worth summoning for. Around the same time, they also gave every player 7 stones, since the official Dokkan Twitter account now had over 77,777 followers. At the time I'm recording this video, they have over 1.3 million followers, so this really takes you back. They also dropped a new Super Strike event and some rebirths alongside a new double rates banner. You know when I said that they were probably dropping something related to Trunks this month because of the Logan bonus? Well, I don't think it's a coincidence that the first Super Strike event of the month was Xenotrunks. He was surprisingly seen by many players as one of the best Super Strike unit. I honestly don't understand how or why, but it looked like he could do a lot of damage. Like, I guess out of all the Super Strike units, he had one of the higher attack stats, but he only had a flat stat buff of 5000 attack, and his link set was also pretty whack, so I don't know. But what I'll say is that I'm sure that Tricky when facing one enemy definitely helped him a lot back then. As for the new rebirths, they pretty much followed up on the list of the most voted characters to get Dokkan Awakenings. The Baba Shop HL Super Saiyan Goku was pretty solid, especially on Vegito's team, since he was a super type unit given 2 key and 20% attacks to the entire rotation when above 50% HP, and shared 3 links with Super Vegito. So you could go crazy with Vegito's counters when this guy was on rotation. He only had an extreme damage multiplier though, so he couldn't hit very hard himself, but the support kind of made up for it. In Super Saiyan Gohan was not as good, like all they did was buff his damage, and his link set was pretty whack since he didn't have prepared for battle, and the in-type Gods leader was an extreme class unit that just didn't work well with him. So yeah, Gohan was okay at best. Strength Super Saiyan 2 Vegeta was also just a damage dealer, and even though he had prepared for battle, like he still had a supreme damage multiplier and only got an additional 10% attack to his passive skill buff. Like he wasn't complete garbage, he could still output some decent numbers. This guy disappointed many players at the time, as they expected more from him. As for their double rates banner, it was not bad. Like every unit on the banner was at least runnable, alongside some very good ones, like Tech Future Gohan, the Super Saiyan 2 Gokus, and Interlist. But at the same time, they teased on the news that something insane was coming in December, so yeah, the banner was probably not worth your stones. A couple of days later, they re-released the AGL type summon banner, but honestly who cares, because at the same time they teased the next Dokkan Fest and it looked like it was going to be Goku Black. Goku Black came 3 days later and was a big disappointment. He was the physical type demigod's leader and was pretty much just a worse version of Wuhan. He had the same special attack gimmick, meaning that his super attack would get additional effects at SA10, but unlike Wuhan, he didn't have a 30% chance of raising his SA multiplier on super. And his Nukin passive gave a flat stat buff of 3000 attack instead of a percentage buff like Wuhan. His link set was also not great at the time, since he was the first Zamasu unit and his linking partners were still not in game. And just so you know, this guy was so bad on GP that they actually buffed him when he came to global. Like they literally had no choice but to buff him, otherwise nobody would have even bothered summoning for him. Like that's crazy. His banner was, I guess, okay. Like it featured physical full power Frieza, physical Kid Buu, physical Broly, as well as the Nukin Blue Boys if you wanted to go that route with Goku Black. But like I said, he wasn't that great. As for his Dokkan event, honestly it was fairly easy if you had Strength Gogeta, Strength Omega Shenron, or AGL Super Vegito. Unlike the other Dokkan events, he had no gimmick, like none at all. So all you needed really is good units who weren't in. Fun fact, but I think his Dokkan event was the first one to come with a new unique OST. He also came with a new farmable Goku Black to obviously not make his super attack effect pay to win. Tech Goku Black was obviously not good, just a safe fodder for physical Goku Black. And his drop rate was apparently very bad. But I think people were just unlucky because I farmed him multiple times in the past and I don't think they changed the rates ever since, maybe I'm wrong. And from what I remember, it wasn't that bad honestly. 5 days later, they dropped the update 2.15.0, which expanded the amount of box space you could have. You could now expand your box space to up to 1000. I never bought box space and I'm currently sitting at 1875 box space and have 1126 characters. This just shows how far the game has come. It was also already time for the 100 million download celebration. It had the typical login bonus rewards but like 10 times better. 5 stones every day for 30 days. Like bro, that's crazy even by today's standards. I can only imagine how players felt at the time seeing this. But that's not the only crazy thing it came with. They also dropped an insane special ticket summon banner. It featured literally every single Dokkan Fest character except for Goku Black, who sucked anyways. And for every 50 stones that you spent since the game first came out and the release date of the banner, you would get 1 ticket. So this is pretty much the first ever roll the right ticket summon banner. The game was almost 2 years old, so if you were a well, I'm sure you were very happy the day you got your tickets. The same day they also dropped a new celebration, an Arale themed celebration. So I guess to celebrate the 35th year anniversary of the Dr. Slump anime, which I honestly didn't even know was a thing. But anyways, open login in for the first time during the duration of the campaign. All players were rewarded with a special login bonus in Arale and a poop support item. Well, that's a rough translation. When this came to global, they opted for Stinky Pink. I don't know which one is worse, but the support item was pretty decent, giving the entire rotation 3 key and a flat stat buff of 15,000 attack. As for the login bonus Arale, she wasn't all that, but she got a Dokkan Awakened like 2 months later, so we'll come back to her. The celebration also came with a new story event, where you could farm a Kid Goku and an Arale. They were both not great, and obviously just here to be used as SA fodder for other characters who shared their names. 2 days later, they dropped another World Tournament, and they finally changed the reward system. There was now 2 types of SSR tickets, the silver SSR tickets and the golden SSR tickets. The only difference between the two is that you needed 5 silver tickets instead of 1 golden tickets to do a single summon. So 5 silver tickets were the equivalent of 1 SSR ticket, and the golden SSR ticket was just an SSR ticket. And the rewards were also significantly improved. You now only needed to earn 10 million points to get your first golden SSR ticket, and about 5 million points for 6 silver SSR tickets. And you were also able to get an additional 6 silver tickets for 20 consecutive wins. So if you do the math, for about the fourth of the grind, you were able to get quadruple the rewards. So a pretty huge buff if you ask me. This is also the world tournament that introduced the local rankings as well as the first ever world tournament LR. You weren't able to awaken him into an LR just yet, but it was stated in the news that he will get an additional awakening in the future. And since he could already become a TUR, it was obvious that the next step for him was to become an LR. Nonetheless, his TUR was not bad at all. He had an 80% HP leader skill, a supreme damage multiplier, 80,000 defense at the start of turn, and an additional 4,000 defense to all allies, and a very high defensive stat for a free-to-play card. So yeah, a pretty good defensive card on Wuhan's team. As for the actual World Tournament reward card, well, I guess Goku was decent for a World Tournament reward card. He had a supreme damage multiplier, 2 ki and 7,000 attack at the start of turn, and a decent link set. Near the end of the month, they dropped some new Baba Shop units, which was a very smart move on their part, because those guys were very expensive. Each copy costed 100,000 Baba points, which is a lot if you farm them, but very easy to obtain if you sell some summonable SSRs. So I'm sure a lot of players at the time just sold all their extra SSRs, since dupes were pretty much useless at the time if you already had the character at SA10. So I can only imagine how many players, Wells included, sold their Dokkan Fest dupes thinking they weren't going to be useful. Little did they know that the potential system was right around the corner. But yeah, those Baba Shop units were actually pretty decent, since they were all support type units for their respective types. They gave 2 ki to their respective type, and had a 50% chance of giving an additional 20% attack to that same type. And when you look at their leader skills, some people went as far as to say that those free-to-play Baba Shop units were like free-to-play demigods leaders, which I guess they were, but demigods leaders were not seen as good leaders at the time, so this wasn't really a huge deal. The month of November started with an Arale crossover summon banner. The banner came with 7 new summonable characters, and your first 3 multis were guaranteed to have at least one of the new featured units. But let's see if the characters were actually good or just trophy cards. Physical Arale had a slightly worse version of Gogeta's leader skill, a supreme damage multiplier, an 80% attack buff on super, and I guess an okay link set. Like, she had 4 key links, and linked very well with the other units that came with her. She was seen as a better physical ultimate Gohan, and the good thing about all the Arales that came on that banner, all of their super attacks were farmable thanks to the Arale story event. So just because of that, their perceived value was slightly higher. AGL Arale had a supreme damage multiplier, a 20% chance of stunning on super, and a 90% attack buff when her ki was 7 or more. Her links were also not bad, like she had 5 key links, so honestly not a bad unit at all. Strength Arale was a Neo unit and had 70% attack and defense when above 30% HP, so you already know what that means. She was a goat in the World Tournament. Some people were even saying that she was better than Strength Broly, and honestly she probably was at the time. She had more key links, a better start of turn attack buff, and since there was still no potential system, their base attack stats were not that far off from each other. Shaman, I don't I don't know where they come up with these names, bro, but yeah, he had a supreme damage multiplier, 60% attack and defense when facing only one enemy, linked pretty well with Arale, and had very decent stats for an SSR. So yeah, he was not a bad card at all. Tech Mercenary Tao, who's actually from one of the Dragon Ball movies that featured Arale, was actually not bad. He had a supreme damage multiplier and a 50% chance of gaining 100% attack at the start of turn, so he was like a mini Strength Beerus. Int General Blue was an insane debuffer. Like I already said, the Int type had a lot of stunners back then, and this guy had a 70% chance of stunning on super, while also having a 30% chance of reducing the attack of all enemies by 20% at the start of turn. So you already know, he was a beast on that Int team. He was pretty much just the upgraded version of his SR variant. Sourman, the closest thing we ever got to a Superman card in Dokkan, was, well, not super at all. Like, he was decent at the time, supreme damage multiplier and like a very decent passive when above 50% HP, but his link set was just, it was just bad, bro. And he would also lose 7% HP with each super attack, which you already know adds up really fast. This banner also came with a new story event, where you could get the necessary medals to awaken the 2 new Arales, and farm some stinky pinks if you wanted to. A week later, they announced on the news that a new warrior will appear in the next episode of Dragon Ball Super on the 13th of November. And I did my research, and yeah, you already know who it was. The one and only Vegito, bro. So it was clear as day now that he was coming soon, very soon. A couple of days later, they released the special family Kamehameha banner, the first of many reruns of that banner. I remember when I first started playing the game, they would legit release this banner every single celebration, and I unfortunately fell for it at the time. Well, Strength Gotenks was kind of a beast with his easy, but we're getting ahead of time. The banner had 3 guaranteed SSR multi-summons, and the featured units were I guess not bad if you're a new player, but the thing is, this banner came up with a new story event, with some new free-to-play characters and most importantly, Dokkan Awakenings for the family Kamehameha units. So I guess depending on how good their TORs were, and if you cared about Vegito Blue or not, this was maybe worth a multi or two. Agel's percent Gohan start of turn attack buff went from 70 to 90%. Coupled with his new TOR stats and the Shattering the Limit link, I guess he was pretty decent and a beast in Broly's Dokkan event. Strength Super Saiyan Goku got a more significant buff. His HP condition went from 80 to 30%, so quite a huge jump, and he also now got 3 ki instead of 2 and 5000 attack instead of 2000, so he also became quite good. Strength Goten on the other hand only got like a 30% attack buff at the start of turn, which I guess was still more than what HL Super Saiyan Gohan got, but not as big as a buff as Goku got. Nonetheless, with his ability to orb change, he was still very good and probably better than his HL counterpart. As for the new free-to-play units, Strength Videl was decent I guess. She could lower defense on super and had a 70% chance of getting the entire rotation 20% attack and defense at the start of turn. The problem is that her team cost was just way too high to justify bringing her into a Super Strike event. SR Kid Trunks was just not great at all. Like his passive wasn't anything bad but not anything good either. And since he was an SR, his stats were pretty low. If you really didn't have any other options, he was probably okay in some Super Strike events. 4 days later, they released another Super Strike event. Tech Piccolo was I guess not bad. He got an additional 5% attack and defense to his super type buff and could lower defense on super. But this wasn't enough for him to be worth using in Goku's Prime Battle event, since he was tech. The same day they teased 2 new Dokkan Fest units, the GOAT Vegito Blue and Rose. I'm sure people found that weird at the time, like Merge Zamasu would have made more sense to go alongside Vegito Blue, but whatever, the hype was probably through the roof since they teased these guys just after the episode aired on GP. Nonetheless, after probably the longest 3 days Dokkan has ever known, Rose and Vegito were officially here, and they both had their own Dokkan Fest banners and new banner units. They both introduced a new type of leader skill into the game. Super and extreme class units, ki plus 3 and HP attack and defense plus 50%. This was insane at the time. Because it meant that you could now run full teams of Dokkan Fest characters. So the type of the units didn't really matter anymore. You could just summon for the units that were insanely busted and just slap them on their teams. Like you didn't need that specific gods leader to make that specific unit runnable, like they did with the gods and demigods leaders. But what was cool about those new leader skills is that they didn't fully replace the gods leaders. They still had their place in harder Dokkan events where you wanted to go all in on one specific type. So it was actually the most balanced the meta had been so far. Nonetheless, Angel Rose was insane. He had an immense damage multiplier while greatly lowering defense on super, a 100% starter fin attack buff while also giving 3 ki to extreme class units, and a link set that would only get better with time. So this guy was doing a lot of damage for free, but also made the extreme class team work with key support. Thanks to him, it didn't really matter if the units didn't quite link well together. As long as they were good, they could be put on his team. And the thing with the extreme class units at the time is that almost all of them had some sort of debuff, either on super or as part of their passive, which made his team probably the best in the game at the time. His banner unit Zamasu was also not bad. He had an honestly not bad leader skill. He was like a mini gods leader for all types, so if you didn't pull Rose, you could generally still run his team with Strength Zamasu and an HL Rose friend. He also had a supreme damage multiplier while greatly lowering defense on super, a 60% start of turn attack buff, a healing passive, recovering 10% HP if you start the turn under 80% HP, adding another healer into Rose's team, who he shared 3 links with by the way. So yeah, this guy was very good. As for physical Vegito Blue, he also was insane, but not as insane as people might remember. He had the super class variant of this new type of leader skill, and it was obviously just like Rose, very good. Like being able to run all those crazy super class Dokkan Fest on the same team was just insane. Like don't forget that this was the first time ever that you could run HL Super Vegito and Strength Gogeta together on an actual meta relevant leader skill. Like sure, you could still do it before before under Gogeta's leader skill, but that leader skill was just not meta anymore and was starting to age. Now you could do it under a leader skill that not only gave ki, but also decent stats. And bro, Vegito, Super Vegito and Super Gogeta all shared 5 links together. So yeah, best believe that this rotation was just insane beyond belief. But yeah, Vegito Blue had an immense damage multiplier, a great chance to launch up to 2 additional attacks, each of which had a 10% chance of becoming a super attack. And if you don't know how this worked, the first attack was always guaranteed, and then you had, I think, a 50% chance of launching the second super attack. But what made this guy crazy and probably my favorite unit ever is the fact that he could also counter. So let me get this straight for you. This guy could launch up to 3 super attacks in the same turn, tank normal attacks like nothing with his 30% damage reduction, and counter them with tremendous power. Like, this was just insane. But the problem is that he had no start of turn attack buff, which wasn't that much of a problem at the time, but don't forget that this was like 2 months before the 2nd year anniversary, and the hidden potential system was still not out yet, so his counter also couldn't crit, and he didn't have the potential chance of launching a 4th super attack, which made a huge difference. Like bro, the difference between this guy dupeless and this guy with 1 dupe was like night and day. This is probably the most dupe reliant unit in the whole game, honestly, even to this day. Vegito Blue, unlike Rose, came with 2 new banner units. Tech Trunks, even though not as good as Strength Zamasu, was still decent. He had a supreme damage multiplier, while raising his attack by 50% for 6 turns on super, an 80% start of turn attack buff when facing 1 enemy, and I guess a not so bad link set due to him having prepared for battle. He also linked pretty well with Tech Future Gohan, so on a mono tech team they were a decent rotation. But the thing is, you had so many better options on VB's team that there was really no point on running this guy, let alone keep him on rotation to stack his super attack effect. Int Mai, even though not crazy, was int and a decent stunner. Like honestly, let's just be real. Like bro, she was just the super class version of Hit, who is literally just Demigra. As for the Dokkan events, well, Rose's Dokkan event was fairly easy if you had Super Vegito, Vegito Blue, or Super Sentry Gotenks, and as long as you understood the fact that Zamasu in the 2nd phase was invincible. Like I can only imagine how many players tried to kill Zamasu only to realize that he couldn't be killed, and that all you needed to do was kill Rose. Rose did hit quite hard though. As for Vegito Blue, well, if you had all the new Zamasu units, this Dokkan event was apparently very easy, one of the easiest to date. But if you didn't, it was quite challenging since Vegito had damage reduction in his last phase that you could only disable with a Zamasu or Goku Black unit. Like it was still doable with a God's Leader, but you could easily get caught in the first phase that had 3 enemies of different types. Now let's talk about their banners. They both had 77 hours of the 3 multis get 1 free discount and featured some pretty good units. Rose's banner had physical Goku Black, who was now much better thanks to AGL Rose. They shared 6 links together, which was all their links. Strength Omega Shenron, who was still very good, and Buhan, who was simply a beast, and physical Broly, who could still do a lot of damage. So his banner featured, at the exception of Golden Frieza, every single extreme class gods and demigods leaders. So yeah, a very good banner, and probably a must summon. Vegito Blue's banner featured both Super Vegito and Super Gogeta, 2 units who were still very good, and that both shared 5 links with him, and Agel's % Blue Kaioken Goku and Tech's % Gotenks, who both were still able to output some very good numbers. So this meant that this banner featured every single super class gods and demigods leaders that released that year, so also a very good banner. They also at the same time announced the hidden potential system in the news, and it looked like it was going to come out at the end of the month. So in preparation for it, they dropped the first ever versions of the potential orb events. The stages would rotate between the week, but thankfully were available during the weekend. The problem is that you could only run each stage 3 times per week, and they didn't give a lot of orbs. Like the most amount of orbs you could get in a week is like about 3.5% the amount of orbs you needed to rainbow 1 single unit of a specific type, and that's the best case scenario. Most of the time you'd only get about 1 to 2% the amount of orbs you needed to rainbow a unit, so you needed to run the event like 50 to 100 times to rainbow a single unit, meaning you could probably only rainbow like 1 to 2 units of a specific type per year, so about 5 to 10 units per year. Like that's just crazy low. Like I genuinely don't even know what they were thinking. Toshi had no chill at the time. He really wanted you to buy those hidden potential system packs from the shop. The month ended with, as you guessed it, the update 3.0.0, the update that introduced the hidden potential system into the game. And let me tell you that the hidden potential system at the time was something else. Not only were the potential orbs extremely scarce like I explained earlier, you had to activate each node individually. Like, not just select them individually and then activate them all at once. Like, nah bro, you had to select a node, activate it, and then and only then you could select and activate another one. Like, that's just crazy. Like, I can only imagine how much time it took to rainbow a unit. Like, just imagine you were a Rel at the time who bought one of the potential orb packs who had like the worst value ever, and like you're so happy and everything, you know, and then you open the potential system tab and realize that you have to activate each node individually to rainbow your unit. And that's not even it, because when you're done 2000 years later, you realize that nothing changed. Because yes, the little rainbow star that you know of today came with a later update. At the time, you couldn't even tell at first glance if a unit was rainbowed or not. Now for how much this update actually impacted the game. Well, at first I thought that this was like a huge update that completely changed the game and how people viewed units, which was the case in a sense, but the problem is that the potential orbs were so scarce that even the biggest of wells only had like a few units rainbowed. Like, there simply just wasn't enough orbs in the game for it to have that much of an impact. Unlike something like the link level update that was essentially free. Like, a lot of links went from being completely worthless to giving some percentage buff instantly. But that's not to say that the update wasn't big. Like, it for sure was. It's just that the impact of the update was spread out throughout the year, and not like instantly when the update came out. Like, it took some time for the player base to actually get their hands on some potential orbs and see by themselves how truly powerful that update was. As for the units who got the biggest impact from the update, well, you obviously had the GOAT physical Vegito Blue who just became cracked. Like, before the potential system, his counters couldn't crit, and he was only able to launch up to 3 super attacks. Now he was able to launch up to 4 super attacks, launch multiple supers more consistently, because if you don't know how the additionals work, is that the additional chance you get procs with each attack. So for example, if you have a unit that has a built-in additional attack and you give him 5 additionals, those 5 additionals will perk on his first super and second super. So you pretty much have twice as many chances of launching an additional potential system attack with a unit that has built-in additionals. And this also works with counters. So Vegito Blue was an insane slot 1 unit, and since he was, you can guess that Super Vegito was also insane too. And the same thing for physical Broly, who could now launch up to 3 super attacks, with each of them having a chance of creating. Gojidatsu was also insane thanks to his super effective against all types. You could just go full additionals on him, which wasn't the case for almost any unit at the time. Like, the APT guys quickly realized that the most optimal route for almost every single unit in the game was to just go full crits. So almost no one went with additionals, let alone dodge chance. Like, bro, dodge chance at the time was just completely worthless. But its time will come, don't worry about that. You also had all the OG leaders, since they were and are still to this day the only units in the game to have the rank S potential system, simply meaning that their potential system gave more stats, while every other Dokkan Fest after Beerus had a rank A potential system. At the same time, they also released the last 3 Baba Shop units, but now that the potential system was a thing, there was no way in hell you were going to sacrifice an SSR just to be able to buy one of those units, especially if you pulled Vegito Blue or Rosé. Like, they sucked on their team, and were only really good on the monotype teams. The month of December started with a new Dokkan Fest cell and the strength type summon banner. But honestly, I'm going to stop mentioning those type of banners because they were quite frankly just not worth the stones anymore. Strength Cell was the strength type demigod's leader. He had Gotenks mechanic, meaning he had a different super attack at 11 key, but unlike Gotenks, that 11 key was actually pretty weak at the time and not something you actually wanted to go for. He could also super at 10 key, which was huge, and if I'm not mistaken, this is the first unit ever to have the ability to stack defense on super. I honestly didn't even know that. I don't know why, but in my head the first unit who had the ability to do so was the Fridge Play Vegito. But no, it actually was Strength Cell. Unfortunately, stacking defense was not a powerful ability at the time. As a matter of fact, stacking defense was pretty much irrelevant until 2019 when they first introduced the Legendary Goku event. But if you want to get technical, it did have some use in like some very niche Super Battle stages, but we'll talk about that in the future. Cell's passive skill, End of the Game, game didn't end the game at all. All it did was give him 100% attack at the start of turn. And as for his link set, it honestly wasn't bad. It's just that he had no good linking partners on his own team. His best linking partners were actually in Wuhan, Physical Cuckoo Black and in Janemba. And the only team where you could run them together was AGL Rose's team. And the worst part is that none of those units were actually featured on his banner. His banner featured Strength Omega Shenron, Super Sentry Vegeta, Strength Gogeta, Tech Cell, and Strength Broly. So actually a lot of Dokkan Fest characters, but none of them really worked with him. As for his new Dokkan event stage, well, it was just the Tech Cell Z-Hard stage, but with more phases, and Cell could be debuffed. So the strategy at the time was to just bring an in team and stun him to death. It was apparently very easy that way. But the thing is, you didn't even need to beat the stage on the super difficulty, since it gave the same type of medals as the Z-Hard stage, or the OG Tech Cell Dokkan event. It's just that, like, you know, the super stage was more consistent as it will always give you 7 medals, while the Z-Hard stage gave you between 3 to 6 medals. Nonetheless, this new stage came with 2 new Dokkan Awakenings. Tech First Form Cell, who awakened from his SR, was surprisingly pretty decent. He was seen as a better tech boo by a lot of people at the time, since his super attack was easier to max out, so he would for the most part do more damage. And more damage meant more healing, as he recovered 30% of the damage he dealt as HP. Strength Super Saiyan Gohan was also pretty good. He had an immense damage multiplier, the second non-Dokkan Fist character to do so if I'm not mistaken, tricky and 70% attack at the start of turn, and a decent link set. So yeah, he was good, and could output some very good numbers on Strength Omega's team. And yet again, is it me, or does it look like Goku is in Super Saiyan 2 here? Unlike Gotenks, there's really no explanation here. He's just Super Saiyan 2 for like no reason. The next day, they teased a new Dokkan event, which came 3 days later. And it was a Dokkan event for Arale. And if you ever wondered where that fire OST came from, well, it came from her Dokkan event. And also, if you don't know much about Arale, well, let me just tell you that she's strong, like ridiculously strong. She can literally shape the reality around her, and she also pretty much soloed Vegeta in a Dragon Ball Super Special. Nonetheless, the Dokkan event was actually pretty bad. Apparently, Arale hit like a truck, and the 2 new Dokkan Awakenings were for the Int Login bonus Arale and the physical Arale that came the last month. Int Arale was still nothing crazy. Like, her stats were very low for a TOR, she had an extreme damage multiplier, and a subpar debuff as her passive. But since his super attack was easily farmable, she had some value as a filler unit on like an in team, for example. Physical Arale on the other hand was insane. She had a very good leader skill, like tricky and 30% HP attack and defense to all types, meaning that if you didn't pull Vegito Blue, you could just run her as her leader and use a friend Vegito. And not only that, she had an immense damage multiplier, and with the same mechanic as Int Buhan, meaning she had a 30% chance of launching a super attack with greater power, and a 120% attack buff on super. Like, bro, this girl was hitting hard. Her only downside really was her link set. Like, it wasn't really that great, but she had the best rainbow leader skill, was one of the hardest hidden unit in the game, and her super attack was farmable. So yeah, she was good, very good. The next week, they released the Baseball Yamcha story event, where you could farm, well, Baseball Yamcha. And yeah, he was just a meme card. But he could stun on super, and the thing with those Yamcha's meme cards is that their team costs were very low, meaning they were actually not bad options on Super Strike events where your team had to have a low team cost. His drop rate was horrible though. Like, not as bad as Prime Bundle Goku, but like still very bad. Around the same time, they also dropped a new Super Strike event. AGLTN was now way better. If you remember how trash his SR was, well, now he actually was not bad. He was one of the few Super Strike units to have an extreme damage multiplier. He had a 30% chance of stunning all enemies at the start of turn, which is way better than the 2% chance he previously had, and was AGL while having the Soul vs Soul link. So he was a good option on Strength Cell's Dokkan event. The same day, Dokkan won the Google Play Best Game Award in Hong Kong and Taiwan, so they gave everyone 5 stones. Like, bro, you can hate on Toshi all you want, but at least this guy was getting Dokkan some awards. Like, I don't even remember the last time Dokkan won anything. There was a time where Dokkan was getting top gross in almost every single celebration. Like, did the game fell off, or are those waifu games just that good, bro? Nonetheless, I guess they expected a lot of return players that day and in the following weeks. So they released some sort of returning login bonus campaign where returning players would get some login rewards every day. This campaign also brought back a lot of events, some new stones pack, triple EXP, and so on. But the interesting part is that first, they revealed that In Piccolo would get his LR Awakening this month, and they also teased a new Future Saga story event. So you already know the end of the month was going to be crazy. A couple of days later, it was already time for the Christmas campaign. It came with a lot of new things, but let's start with the new Future Saga banner. This banner came with a new sort of special discount, where you were guaranteed one of the 3 new featured units on your first multi-summon. And honestly, they made them quite decent to try and bait players before the big banner that was teased 2 months ago. Text% Blue Vegeta, who was simply the best Blue Vegeta in the game, and honestly it wasn't even close. He had a supreme damage multiplier, or raising the attack of all allies by 20% for 1 turn, 70% attack and defense when facing 1 enemy, and a decent link set that actually worked pretty well on the Monotech team. Physical Super Saiyan Trunks was also very good. He had the same spread attack effect as Blue Vegeta, gave 25% attack and defense to the entire rotation, and also had a decent link set. But it was obvious that they were meant to be run together. Him and Blue Vegeta shared 4 links together, with 3 of them being key links. So that rotation was actually pretty strong. Like nothing crazy, but decent if you were starting the game. Strength Blue Goku was also not bad. He had a supreme damage multiplier, an 80% attack buff when facing 1 enemy, and a not so bad link set. So yeah, he was good for an SSR. This banner also came with the new Future Saga story event, where you could farm a new Future Saga Rage Trunks. I generally don't know why his name is not Rage Trunks, but this makes me think that they could still release this card as a Dokkan Fest or banner unit, and actually give it the right name, just like they did with HGL's percentile Trunks recently. Anyways, Trunks was decent for a fish play card. Extreme damage multiplier, 30% attack and defense for 7 turns, the ability to super at 9 key, 4 key links with 1 of them being over and a flash, and a pretty low team cost. So yeah, decent free to play unit. They also dropped the 16 World Tournament, and like I said earlier, you could now officially awaken Piccolo into an LR. Well, on paper you could, but this guy required 70 World Tournament medals. Medals that, if I'm not mistaken, were only obtainable as ranking rewards, and I'm not sure, but I think in the final rounds of the World Tournament, where you had to pick them up on the board before the AI catches up to you. So yeah, it was a very tedious grind. Nonetheless, In Piccolo was a beast. He came with an insane leader skill, 150% HP. Like bro, the highest HP we had seen yet was with the Gods leaders, and it was an HP buff of 100%. And now this guy came with a 150% HP leader skill. So his team was probably the tankiest in the game, since that much HP coupled with Piccolo's support pretty much meant that you didn't need defense. But since you had no key and attack, there was really no point in running this team, other than trying to see how far you could push the HP bar, I guess. His passive was also pretty decent. He had a flat stat buff of 10,000 defense and gave 5,000 defense to the entire rotation. Like, that wasn't a bad support. But the most impressive thing about this guy was his defensive stat. He had 18,000 defense when rainbowed, which is still to this day the highest defensive stat in the game. As for the actual World Tournament reward card, Feat Kamehameha Goku was not bad. He had a supreme damage multiplier with a 20% chance of stunning on super and 60% attack and defense on super. His link set was not very good though, but still a decent free play card nonetheless. Still part of the Christmas campaign, they released the first ever Christmas double rates banner, where you would get 2 Centaroshis per multi-summon. They were essentially just Elder Kais but with a different skin. As for the banner itself, well, the featured units were almost the same as the previous one. It's just that it had GT Goku and Strength Oob, who actually got their rebirths at the same time. HGL's percent 2 GT Goku was a decent card, but nothing special. He had a supreme damage multiplier, a 70% start return attack buff, and a pretty good link set. So honestly just a well-rounded solid unit that you could slap on any of your teams. He did get better with time, as you'll see later on. Strength Majub on the other hand was, well, okay I guess. He had a not so bad leader skill, could lower attack on super, had 7,000 attack and defense when above 30% HP, and a very weird link set. Like bro, his best linking partner was Boo Babidi, and I don't know why, but people at the time were expecting the 2nd year anniversary to feature Super Saiyan 4 Gogeta, so they expected this Oob to at least share 2 links with that future Gogeta, being Fuse Fighter and GT. But yeah, that banner was a big bait for the craziness that was about to drop very soon, because not so long after, the next 2 Dokkan Fests were already teased in game, and it looked like it was going to be Merge Zamasu and Sword of Hope Trunks. Nonetheless, the month ended with a New Year's big thank you campaign. It featured a special Logan bonus campaign that wasn't really anything crazy but worth mentioning, and the obvious big end of the year summon banner, featuring a new Merge Zamasu and Sword of Hope Trunks in the same banner. And the craziest part is that this banner also brought back physical Vegito Blue. So if you didn't have him, this was your chance. And funnily enough, every other featured unit was a Trunks. So if you were a big Trunks fan, this was the banner to summon on. But anyways, let's cover the new units and Dokkan Awakenings. Tech Merge Zamasu came with a new type of leader skill. Pretty much the God's version of Rose's leader skill minus 2 ki. But obviously due to the lack of ki, this leader skill was really not usable with 2 leaders. But if you had both him and Rose, you could run this guy as your leader, have Rose on your team, and use another Rose as your friend leader. And thanks to Rose's ki support, you wouldn't even feel the lack of ki. All you had to do was keep 1 on each rotation. This might have been the strongest team at the time, because Merge Zamasu was actually insane. He had an immense damage multiplier while greatly lowering defense on super. His super attack was farmable. He had one of the best extreme class link set in the game, sharing 5 links with AGL Rose and Physical Goku Black, and most importantly a massive 120% attack buff at the start of turn. So yeah, this guy was hitting hard. And I know some people might have disliked the fact that he lowered super class allies attack by 10%, but you weren't running this guy on a super class team anyways, so it didn't really matter. In Trunks was also very good. He had the super class variant of Merge Zamasu leader skill, which in his case also worked even though he didn't have a unit like Rose, because all the fusions units were already overflowing with ki. Like Vegito Blue, Super Vegito, Strength Gogeta, and Super Sentry Gotenks shared like 7 ki between them. So the 1 ki that Trunks gave was actually more than enough. And unlike Merge Zamasu, you could actually run 2 Trunkses as your leaders, and it did work. As for his kit, Trunks had the same super attack effect as Merge Zamasu, a farmable super attack, a Nuken passive, and a decent link set. So an all-around decent card. Fun fact, but this was probably Super Sentry Gotenks' best team, since it was way easier to hit his 11 ki on that team as long as he wasn't put in the middle slot. The 2 new Super Trunks Dokkan Awakens were also pretty good. They both had very decent kits and passives, and both shared 6 links with the new Sword of Hope Trunks. Trunks' new Dokkan event was fairly easy. He had the same gimmick as the Golden Frieza Dokkan event, so a finishing blow on his last phase, which you would almost never see because units by that point were just doing too much damage. Like if you had physical Vegito Blue, this event was probably a joke. Merge Zamasu Dokkan event was also pretty easy. Like you just needed Trunks or a full mono in team and you were good to go. His stage also came with a new physical Merge Zamasu. This card was actually very good for Super Strike events, thanks to his massive attack debuff and low team cost. But outside of that, he was mainly just used to raise the super attack level of the summonable Tech Merge Zamasu. This is also the time where they dropped the second Prime Battle event, featuring Strength LR Frieza. And from what I could gather, his event was not as bad as Goku's. Like, it was still hell, don't get me wrong. But unlike the first Prime Battle event, you are now allowed to use any type of farmable character, not only strike characters, which give you a larger pool of AGL characters to choose from. But most importantly, it let you use LR Prime Battle Goku, which if you had farmed, made the event like 10 times easier to at least beat. But the rates were still the same, so you still had to run the event like 100 times to awaken LR Frieza. But since it was almost 6 months later, players' stamina bars were a little bit bigger, so stamina was less of an issue. Like, it still was a big problem, but just like slightly less bad than before. As for the MVPs of this event, you obviously had LR Goku. He had the best leader skill for that event, while also being the hardest hitter. The true strike Vegetas, they were AGL linked well together and could do some decent damage. AGL Paikuhan with his support and debuff on super. AGL Tian if you were very lucky with his stun. Whis with his stun and free Senzu. And the good Jackie Chun with his seal. Anyways, LR Frieza was obviously very good. Like, he was an LR and had LR stats, but his leader skill sucked compared to Goku's. He just gave a flat stat buff of 7000 attack to all types. That was just a horrible leader skill even at the time. But the rest of his kit was pretty decent. He lowered attack on his 18 ki, had a better passive than Goku, giving him 30,000 attack and 5,000 defense at the start of turn, and a link set that was also better than Goku's. The problem is that most of his best linking partners were not out yet, and as for the one who was out, well, he was a Dragon Ball Fusions character, so very limited. But if you actually did manage to pull him and Frieza were a very strong rotation on a mono strength team. The month ended with the first ever New Year's banner. It featured AGL Rose, AGL Super Blue Kaioken Goku, Tex Percent Gotenks, AGL Super Vegito, Strength Percent Vegeta, Strength Gogeta, and AGL Super Sentry Goku. But what made this banner insane is the fact that it had 3 guaranteed SSR multis, so your chances of pulling something good were way higher on your first 3 multis. So definitely a banner worth summoning for, especially if you wanted one of those featured units. To celebrate the new year, they gave everyone a free SSR Tech Frieza and announced the New Year's login bonus campaign, which looked definitely definitely better than the end of the year looking bonus campaign. Frieza was just a trophy card, like nothing crazy and definitely not as crazy as that here. Like bro, when you think about it, this might have been the craziest year Dokkan ever had. It was a roller coaster of emotions. Like we pretty much got the two biggest meta shifts Dokkan had ever known within the same year. But the craziest part is that I think the next year is actually even more insane. But we'll talk about that in the next video.